again for joining us. This is the Black education experience in the United States. And if you are watching, hopefully you have watched all of the series leading up to this, which is our final episode in this series that we hope you're getting a lot of good stuff from. Testaments of courage, freedom, resilience, and dignity. The purpose of this series has been to help educators, administrators in education have a deeper understanding and appreciation for the movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and the concerns and calls for racial justice across this country that we've heard over the last year now as it's come forward. And so we're going to use this episode as an opportunity to kind of reflect back on the previous episodes, seeking to tease out some of the learnings that I'm hoping folks will take away from this series. And so with that, we're going to jump right in. Calling this lesson, Making Black Lives Matter in Schools and on the Campus. We call it that because, of course, what we're experiencing in many of our schools at all levels of education, from kindergarten to higher ed, is a continued lack of concern, respect, appreciation, and understanding, not just for the Black experience in this country, but also for Black students and Black professionals. The subtitle of the series seeks to highlight those aspects of the African-American experience that speaks not just to Black people's humanity, but to all of our humanity. And the hope is that by recognizing in the Black experience in education these standards and clearly indicating across episode to episode, all of these values show up: courage, freedom, resilience, and dignity. And so beginning with the first episode, next slide. The lingua franca of freedom, the African invention of African-American English. We start here with the fundamental piece of appreciation for not just what Africans achieved in the development of what is called African-American English, but that episode was primarily meant to help to serve as a corrective. This map is a map of the various language families that exist across the continent of Africa. The language family in the red is meant to indicate that language family from which what we understand as African-American English actually emerges from. And so that episode sought to clarify and correct calling it a misunderstanding is being nice, but it is in fact an act of oppression when you fail to acknowledge a people's language and instead refer to it as a broken form of another language. So here are the things that we want to highlight: that with respect to education, diversity is indispensable. A people's humanity is evidenced through their culture. The culture of Black people is the testament, if you will, to the humanity of Black people. It is how every community expresses their humanity. It can only be expressed through one's culture and cultural identity. Therefore, to honor a people is to honor their culture. The contrary, to dishonor a people's culture is indeed to dishonor their humanity. And so with respect to the Black experience in education, we have here at this first start an appreciation for this fundamental act of humanity on the part of African people who found themselves captured and placed in the chains of slavery, a reality that denied their humanity outright. this act of developing a language and a means to communicate to themselves, a means to communicate to the people who enslave them, as well as a reservoir, if you will, of their identity. The second lesson, outlaw education. Black education as resistance to institutional racism sought to speak about the ways in which Black folks during slavery saw education as a pathway to freedom and a means to outwit the system of slavery itself. It's Frederick Douglass who said that to deny education to any people is one of the greatest crimes against human nature. It is to deny them the means of freedom and the rightful pursuit of happiness, and to defeat the very end of their being. Douglass, as someone who was once enslaved himself, who fought his way to freedom and had to make good use of the meager education he was able to achieve while in chains, speaks to the ways in which the systems of white supremacy at that time sought to control the lives of Black people by the denial of education, as we see today and through these lessons. That denial, that third point there, that educational discrimination, the denial of equal opportunity within education, continues the oppressive logic of white supremacy. Educational equality is the key to freedom. Black people have always prized education as the key to freedom and prosperity. Education was outlawed as a means to control. And as I said, with respect to discrimination, that indeed what we talk about when we say in this country that, we live in a meritocracy, that is, that by now should be clearly understood as a myth, indeed as a lie, that a meritocracy requires educational equality. The third lesson, defining freedom, emancipation, and the creation of the public school, was a critical intervention in U.S. history, in that most of us, overwhelmingly, most of us have no knowledge of the crucial role Black people played in the establishment of compulsory education in this country. This lesson sought to not just correct that narrative that often sees or places Black people in a position of receiving the benefits of the system or handouts and those kinds of things, not having the capacity to do for themselves, not having the capacity to or the intellect or the creativity to not just imagine possibility, but to execute possibility into reality. As Du Bois, in his magnum opus, Black Reconstruction in America, identifies, he dedicated an entire chapter to this point. States the first great mass movement for public education at the expense of the state in the South came from Negroes. Many leaders before the war had advocated general education, but few had been listened to. Schools for indigents and paupers were supported here and there and more or less spasmodically. Some states had elaborate plans, but they were not carried out. Indeed, public education for all at public expense was, in the South, a Negro idea. Black self-determination advances democracy. In that lesson, we learned that in developing public schools in post-war United States, post-Civil War, African Americans assured compulsory education for working class and poor white folks too. The denial of Black achievement is racism's intention. It is intentional that most folks in this country have no knowledge of this critical aspect of U.S. history. This is not just, Black history. We're going to talk about that distinction later. But this is U.S. history. You cannot tell the story of the United States properly, appropriately, without including this chapter in that story. Yet, So the denial of Black achievement is racism's intention. It enables folk to continue to walk around believing that Black people are incapable, when indeed Black people have all capacity and have shown it against the odds. It creates a false notion of white superiority that cannot stand. And we see this time and again. Every generation has a clear example of white people walking the earth believing in their superiority, only to be met with defeat on many levels at the hands and minds of Black people. Black liberation has not been rooted in revenge, but has been advanced toward and fueled by freedom. It has in fact benefited all people. Every generation, this is a reality. And yet we still have to contend with the fears and fragilities of white folks in powerful positions. The fourth lesson: education is a civil right. Resisting the resegregation of public schools. Of the episodes, this one sought to do something a little different in that rather than kind of work through a timeline or pick out a particular episode in history, my intention was to kind of capture the entirety of that period and also use it as a barometer to our present moment. The general thesis, if you will, for that episode states that the engine for each form of institutional racism one could name, whether we're talking about police brutality, mass incarceration, employment or housing discrimination, is oiled by the discriminations Black people have experienced in the fields of educational access and educational attainment. To state it the other way, that were we to actually live in a society where Black people, now again, we're focusing on the Black experience here, but this is applicable to any other non-white community in this country, that if we in fact lived in a society where educational access and attainment were made available to all people, then the concerns of mass incarceration, the realities, I should say, of mass incarceration, of police brutality, employment and housing discrimination would likely not be as they are, if at all. So if you have not seen that episode, I highly encourage you to check it out. This episode also lifted up the courage and highlighted the courage of everyday African Americans who, during the civil rights movement, really risked their lives to achieve a measure of opportunity to push forward the work of justice for Black people during the civil rights era in ways that clearly demonstrated their capacity to look beyond their immediate needs and concerns. Black courage is ethical and selfless, as evidenced in U.S. history. Black movements for equity and justice are led by actors who are motivated by more than their own concerns. We see this in the story of Ruby Bridges, where her family, literally deliberating whether or not to pursue integrating the school, having a clear understanding of the risks involved, and would actually experience some of that play out in their lives. Yet they did it, understanding that they were acting in a way that would widen the opportunities for others beyond their own selves. Courage is not the absence. And so by their example, we learn, and the example of many others, courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of conviction. The courage of Black people is most evidenced in their fortitude and faith in the rightness of their cause. And by unlocking the change of generational poverty begins with legislation that repairs past harm. That piece is a lesson that our nation has yet to truly learn as we continue to enact reformative measures that fail to get at this generation's deep levels of poverty. The fifth lesson, the previous lesson, titled The Revelation of Black Studies from Protest to Empowerment, sought to look at and to hold up as a mirror to our present day what led to the development of Black studies, which was, in fact, to U.S. history, the longest student strike that was the result of actions taken against Black students in their effort to learn about and to organize around the interest that they had at that time, what is known as the Black Power movement. What we also sought to address was the long-standing demands of students then with respect to students today, African-American students, and we looked at, and kind of compared that period to our period with intention to see to what degree advances have occurred and where the gaps still exist. Certainly most, probably most is a bit of a stretch, but there are a number of schools in our nation today, colleges, where one can, either enroll in or benefit from or get a degree in African American studies or courses and the like. Yet the issues of our day have more to do with student loan debt, as African Americans are, as a consequence of all the things that we taught in the lessons prior, are saddled with the need to take out loans at a greater rate than their white counterparts. And it's as a consequence of the discrimination that African Americans continue to experience in their on the college campus, are often met with the inability to obtain the degree, which leads then to often defaulting on their loans at a greater rate as well. And so these concerns cannot be addressed merely by assuring the presence of African American studies on campuses. The work has to proceed and address these other more immediate concerns as well. The takeaways from this lesson include the point that inclusion is the act of recognition. Indeed, what this episode spoke to was the fact that white violence is often the spark that leads to Black organized resistance. And thus, white violence in itself is the ultimate means of repression in a racist system that when Black folks have historically, and even to this day, as we've witnessed in just this last year with the development or the escalation of Black Lives Matter movement, we have seen this play out, that white violence is a denial of Black humanity. It is the ultimate denial of Black humanity. In fact, it's Black death, leads to the killing, the murder, the violation of Black life. The Black resistance then to white violence is in itself an affirmation of Black humanity. Black self-affirmation is a public service, in essence, to other oppressed communities, as we saw in that lesson where Asian American students there in San Francisco, Latinx students there in San Francisco and Berkeley, also began to organize around their own concerns as a consequence of being inspired by what they witnessed from African American students. Solidarity is the collective act of a community bearing witness to justice. That when I'm able to see in you the same aspirations that I carry for myself, then we can work together and achieve justice, or a measure of justice for all. And so since our last episode, I've learned that Connecticut, in the spirit of that episode, has become the first state to require high schools to offer Black and Latinx studies that will begin and commence in the fall of 2022. The governor there, in initiating this move, Ned Lamont, stated that this was long overdue, and indeed it is. As these lessons here and our effort here has indicated, that when speaking about the African American experience in the United States, we are indeed speaking about the experience of the United States. That no community that has been here in this country for this long can ever be effectively marginalized or their story discounted to the footnotes of its own history. African Americans are the makers of U.S. history. Thus, it is important, that all students in the classroom, in learning about this country, its systems, its history, its various, aspects of it, of what makes the United States what it is today, ought to be taught not just about these different communities, but also be taught from the perspective of those communities as they have experienced themselves in this country. So we applaud what Connecticut has done, and continue to work for and call for other states to follow suit. Ultimately, what that lesson sought to share, and certainly what is gleaned from all the other lessons too, is the need for solidarity at this time. When we say Black Lives Matter, we are not saying that Black lives are the only lives that matter. In fact, it is making that point clear that despite all the proclamations that this country has made, that this is a place for everybody, the African American experience is a criticism of that, because Black lives have not mattered. And so joining in solidarity and proclaiming Black Lives Matter is an important development in this country, and yet is only the first step. As we see in this photo, students on the campus there back in the 60s recognized their relationship to each other, joined in community, articulated their demands, and acted on those demands in a way that now all students are able to benefit. What can we, or how can we as educators and administrators ensure that that history, more than merely be taught in our classrooms, but is lived forward in the establishment of institutions that capture the spirit of what those movements represented, the advancement of a true democracy in our country, a true meritocracy within our educational system. And so it is in that spirit that we conclude our series. We typically here, I would share books that I would encourage you to read if you wanted to continue your learning. We end our series with action steps that we invite you to take. Of course, we want you to continue to read, to study, and to raise your awareness. We also invite you to advance racial justice within your organization. That too is vital. It is not enough. There was a period in which I think one of the weeks after the police murder of George Floyd, where the New York Times bestsellers list contained all works that were either written by Black persons or addressing concerns of racial justice. That was pretty monumental. But as we see, it is not enough just to read. Advancement, social advancement does not occur because people walk around with an awareness. we have to take that awareness and actualize it. Advancing racial justice in your organization is a very simple way to become involved in the pursuit of justice for all. You can also join a local effort. In one of the episodes, we talked about how advancing racial justice at the school board level is essential, that a lot of these issues, when we're talking about public education, are state level concerns. So you would want your state representatives to be made aware of how you think and feel with respect to educational access and equity. You can also donate your time and money to racial justice organizations. And that's very important too. And finally, support the Kaplan Educational Foundation, the good work that they are doing to serve as a bridge, to provide a means for students from disadvantaged communities, however that is understood and defined, to receive the benefit of a 4-year college education is a crucial work that we all should seriously consider supporting. And so with that, I am very pleased to have been your host and educator for this series. And if you are interested in learning more about Origin, the Oceande Racial Justice Initiative, you are invited to check out the website where you can learn more about our work at racial-justice.org. And thank you very much. And continue to do the work, continue to stand.
Hello, and welcome back to our last session. But what I'm sure will not be the last time we see each other, especially when it comes to discussing the Black educational experience in the U.S. Um, is we are at a point where the semester has come to an end, the year is coming to an end, but I can assure you that this discussion will continue. um, I am happy to really come into this space and have the opportunity to review the 5 previous sessions that we have delivered as part of our goal, which is to really understand that the history of education in the US is broad ranging, but often never discussed. It touches every part of history, it touches every part of the socioeconomic spectrum. However, it is hardly ever discussed, especially within the context of the privileging higher education. That it's really important because the mission of the Kaplan Educational Foundation has been to develop leaders that will be able to address the needs of their communities, their families, but also to go forward and represent who they are and the needs of their community, and represent also within that the voice to make sure that the needs of everyone are addressed in any particular field. And so I'm delighted to be here again with Eware Oceande. I cannot tell you, this is kind of bittersweet, but I know this is just the beginning of our continued work.
Mm-hmm.
We have many ideas for the future to be able to continue this type of programming, but also to expand it. We are hoping that the Kaplan Educational Foundation is committed to expanding the learning, and we will be providing what I hope will be some curriculum, also ways for you to share it with different groups, repackaging it. And so I just can't tell you how excited. So Eware, I always want to start out by saying it is really truly an honor to work with you. I know you took this project seriously, and you have given it your all. And I can watch the sessions, multiple times and still learn something new. Of course, to my partner, Rodak Tomaclo, who is
Oh,
the Director of Operations at the Kaplan Educational Foundation, who always have the best discussions with her. I know she's my thought partner in so many things that we do, and for that, I am grateful. But it is another thing to be able to see you and Eware really bringing to life into the current moment our discussions. So I leave you with the two of them. Again, I remain a student of the two of you. And so Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you again, Nancy, for creating this space. I will have to say in 2020, I am always just pleasantly surprised to think back and know that we've been able to do this work together. And Ewari, thank you for just giving words and language and being able to pictures, quotes, videos to help really bring this story home. For me, I always, even though we do this work in social justice and education access, I am always frequently thinking, how am I contributing to the solution, or how could I potentially be contributing to the problem? And I think here, I'd love if we could just take another moment to kind of talk through these action steps. I have them on my screen because one thing I am adamant about is that I cannot be complicit in keeping members of my community from being able to fully actualize what they want to be in the world. And I just wondered, you talk first about reading. You know, there's a lot of people doing book clubs and things like that. And just where does the onus lie in the learning? Because I think that's the first key, is like, everyone, we need to educate ourselves, but are we waiting for others? How are we doing that in a way that's meaningful?
Yeah, I think the best learning occurs however it works for you. If it works for you to be in community, to read with others, then that's what you should seek. And as you said, there are plenty of reading groups around. And, you know, you can start one right there on your job, particularly if you work in an educational organization or at a school and you're a teacher or an admin. Definitely the reading list that we provided serves as a great library, I would say, for those that are really interested in taking a deep dive into these questions. That's where action begins. We cannot act, or I should say that the best action, the action that gets the quickest and most lasting results is action that is informed. Informed means empowered, and empowered enables us to get closer to the goals that we've set and recognize need to be achieved. And so, yeah, definitely very grateful that Kaplan Educational Foundation, not just carrying the title in your name, but also recognizes, you know, the primary importance of folks doing the homework to ensure that we can all share the same understanding. And again, I think that one of the things I found so profound as we went through the lessons, you know, I prepared these lessons over the summer, and yet seemed like every time we went live with one of these lessons, it was relevant to something that happened that week, if not that day. And, you know, when we live in a country such as the United States at this hour, where there is such grand division, you know, and that division runs, one of the fault lines of that division is a division based upon people who are running with fantasy, you know, not honoring reality and the decisions that the collective have made with respect to the reality in this country, and those that are, you know, attempting to, however best we can, to reconcile ourselves with the facts as we experience them, and however painful that might be. And so, you know, we each have a part to play in assuring that the future, those that are coming behind us, are inherit a society that is grounded in the best that our educational systems provide.
That's extremely helpful, because I find that in a lot of what's going on in 2020, there's a feeling of powerlessness. Like, what could I possibly do? This is so great.
Oh, yeah.
And I think leading with education, of course, I'm biased because I am in education, but I think that is a good place to start. And next, when you ask people to advance racial justice in their organizations, this to me is the one that I take the most personally. Because I will be honest, I do have a bit of survivor's guilt as someone who's been able to navigate predominantly white spaces and navigate these schools where it was very clear that I was more there to serve as a prop for other students, and that I was needed to be quiet and to the sides. And as you may know from this, I'm not so good at the quiet. And so as we think about advancing racial justice in our organizations, it's just, sometimes I think there's advice to be like, you have to be very kind and understand that people are very behind. And this is where I've had that tension I was talking about, whether or not I'm complicit. And it's like, yes, of course, you always have to be able to work with people, but we have to call it out as we see it.
Yes,
and
yes.
that I have had come to these points in my life where I'm like, I can't sit back, whether I'm an alum, if I'm an employee, whatever's happening. Mm-hmm. It's like, can you just talk a little bit about how this doesn't need to be scary? It's that, I mean, we could point to some large, organizations that have put the money to prove diversity is a bottom line thing. So if we've already proven that there's even a profit to this and we're still fighting it, I think this is the year that it's like, how do you really tell people, like, you got in your organization, it could be your church, it could be your employer, it could be your homeowners association, right? Mm-hmm. Like wherever you are, like you have to be a willing participant, or else you are complacent and then promoting the other side.
Yes. No, I always, in my 20 some odd years of experience in the deliberate work of anti-racism, what I have learned, a number of things, namely that, one, no organization wakes up one morning and decides on its own. No leader, no director, no CEO, no board wakes up and decides, hey, you know what we need to do? We need to have an anti-racism training and bring in some folks in here to help us understand these things. And we're going to put some things in place to make sure that we are working in a just way with respect to our employees, with respect to the communities that we are servicing, et cetera. No, it doesn't happen like that. It happens typically, most often, as a consequence of pressure. And most often that pressure can come as we've seen over the last several months, from the outside, from the quote unquote outside, people gathering who have an investment in seeing this institution change. Mm-hmm. Or most often with respect to the kinds of organizations that we affiliate with, it happens as a consequence of people coming together internally, and that often at great risk. And so, what I'm thankful for is that with respect to the African-American experience, we have a wellspring of inspiration where we can point to each generation, as our episodes indicated, individuals who joined together collectively with other individuals and said, you know what, we've had enough, and that there's nothing wrong with us pursuing the greater good. And that's how we have to understand it. So now, right now, I'm talking to those persons for whom we have been preaching to the choir, and who are sitting in their frustration saying, what can I do? I'm encouraging you to seek out those within your institution, within your organization, that feel likewise, that think likewise, and are ready to proceed, okay? You come together, you sit down together, you talk, and you figure it out, no matter how long it takes, no matter how many days, months, weeks, or whatever, until you have come to a conclusion that you're ready to act. And that action could be, writing a letter to the director, writing a letter to the board, sitting down with the board, inviting the board to a conversation on these questions, or, seeking outside support. But I want to make it very clear, outside support is not a requirement in order to see real change happen. And most often it comes after the fact. Right? Organizations reach out to folks like me after there's been a buildup within the institution where folks say, you know what, this is what needs to happen. Okay. So those things I would say are critical. And for those on the other side of the equation who have been sitting on the fence all this time, questioning the relevancy of any of this, and at this point have realized, okay, you know what? I didn't realize it was this bad, I'm embarrassed even by my lack of knowledge,
Yeah.
I want you to be encouraged too, that in the work, and I'm speaking as an anti-racism facilitator, In this work, there's something that we call radical grace. That is to say that no matter how many times you fall flat on your face, no matter how many times you get it wrong, as long as you got breath in your body, you have the opportunity to change. So no point in getting stuck in the mistakes of your past, even if that past was just 2 minutes ago. What matters is that you own up to those mistakes, acknowledge the errors, whether deliberate or unconscious, and take deliberate steps. What matters is your deliberate actions. You cannot allow racism and any other oppression is not the result often of deliberate action. Yet the result with respect to change can only happen as a consequence of deliberate action. You don't luck up into, an anti-racist space, right?
That's true.
Trip up into that space. You only arrive there as a consequence of deliberate steps taken in your personal journey and in a collective journey with others. And so, if you're an individual and you don't know where to turn, go to the books that we provided. Take the time to study for yourself. And then as you do that reading, I promise you, you're going to come across people who share similar thoughts. The journey will determine itself. But if you're a part of an organization and you're a witness to or witnessing acts of discrimination, acts of bias, you should never feel so disempowered that all you feel you can do is have to sit back and watch. Racial justice is not the responsibility of any one group of people. It is the responsibility of each one of us. And each one of us has a critical role to play. And as evidenced by the stories that we shared in this experience, I hope that you're able to recognize that. So if you need any inspiration, trust me, there are examples throughout the racial spectrum of persons who stood up and said, you know what, it's time for us to do differently. And I'm going to do what I believe my heart is calling me to do today to see that change forward.
That right there, because that's the point. And you only get one point out of this entire series is that you, the person watching this, just like I and Iwari and Nancy, everyone on this call, is that you have to take ownership over being anti-racist. That this is not something that someone needs to convince you to do. This is something you're going to sit on the fence and think, do I want chocolate or latte? I think maybe I'll try the anti-racism and see if it fits.
Come on,
but
man.
I think that this is the point of it, because I feel like, I will just say, as a Black woman who grew up in a predominantly white area, who went to predominantly white schools, I was frequently the fish out of water, where I had to read the room, figure out how to work, figure out how to not be too loud, but not to go unseen, right? And so I think that this is now a situation where everyone now has kind of, the wool's been pulled. Racism is alive and well. And I can think of times where you try to have conversations about microaggressions. If you're trying to explain to someone else, I've been in situations where you try to explain this person has been extremely racist. I'm like, are you sure? So not only do you have to learn the language to be able to function and be acceptable in a situation so you can acquire power to help others, then sometimes you can feel as though maybe I have to convince people. And so I think hopefully everyone can be of one accord that racism is a systemic issue throughout the world, specifically in the United States of America. And that has led to higher death tolls, higher incarceration. This spirals into a situation where everybody is losing. And so it's making sure that everyone has the ownership that we each have to do our part in this. It's not that, let me wait until, this person comes along to fix it, or the laws are passed that fix it, or, when I get the word on how I'm supposed to help. It's that, no, if you literally just see someone and call them out on it, that may be more than enough to signal to other people around and say, people are looking at me and my behavior is no longer acceptable.
That's right. That's
right. And so until we all are on it, you're like you're saying, you can join an effort, you can donate your money, but if you are not committed to the work of saying, I am a citizen of the world, and that I know that there are things going on that are inappropriate and that are wrong, and that it is my duty as a citizen of this universe that I have to stand and witness and stand and say, I'm not for this. And I just thank you for giving me and others the language and the historical perspective to see that it should, like, for me to sit here, a literate person, if we roll back the clock, I would be dead for that. Whomever taught me, all the teachers that I love, like my mother teaching me to read, she would have been dead for that. And like, that's not that long ago.
Right.
And that all of the thought processes and the assumptions that had to be made to make that to be law, that didn't just disappear.
Right.
And I hope that everyone would sit with understanding you need a better view of American history, a more complete, comprehensive, swapping out 28 days to think about what did Black people achieve, but think about how America came to be and how will America continue. Because I don't think we can keep doing what we've been doing.
Yeah.
That wasn't a question, but that's just what you made me think through and listening to all of this. But you just, I feel more empowered, and I thank you for that. Because I thought I was doing a lot, but I was like, there's just way more that I need to do. And I need to make sure every organization that I consider a part of my life, that I continue to be that person to say, hey, this is great, but we need to do better.
That's right.
So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yes.
Lord, what I would love to be able to close out the session is to really get from you kind of our audience, our stakeholders are many, but we really have our students who come from certainly low-income backgrounds, who are of color, who have utmost talent, who, as I've always said, the story of our students is not, going back to one of your, it's not a story of exceptionalism. It's a story of what we all, right, know that we have.
Yes.
It's just granted the opportunities, and removing barriers is so key. So, as I think of the audience that we speak to, which is, high school counselors, which is, advisors at community colleges, at four-year institutions, the most selective institutions out there, but also to the global educational folks. The United States, before COVID,
yes,
one of the places where so many people travel to get educated into this canon of liberal arts, of free thinking, creativity, of science and math put together. And I have to say, I have great admiration for the philosophy, that type of education. What I really want us to fix is access to it. And so understanding that is the audience, and understanding that there are many people that try every day to fulfill accessibility, to be able to add that. But I have to tell you, again, we fail. We fail. And every day that we have to wake up and do it more. And it's just, it's indicative that just like the laws that need to be passed to demand civil rights and human rights, we have had to pass laws to deal with, with how do you treat people, right? And so it's clear. It has to be demanded by law for people of color to have civil rights. It has had to happen that for us to have human rights, they have to be laws, because people, like, to your point, Awari, don't wake up every day and they're like, let's give rights to everyone, right?
They do not do that.
Almost given to a few. So I would love for you to close out our session with kind of what would be that message that you want to drive to make sure that we launch into action.
Yes. I would say to students, I will say a word to students and then a word to administrators that you mentioned. My word to students who are looking to go to either a 2-year or 4-year institution, or looking to transfer from a 2-year to 4-year, that wherever you are in your journey, know that there is a whole universe of support behind you. Regardless of who in your immediate life is supporting you, you are the consequence. You are the living, breathing consequence of an entire history. It doesn't matter whether you're African American, whether you're from West Africa, whether you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from South or Central America. It doesn't matter your geographic location as origin. What matters is your destiny. And your destiny has been tracked by people who came before you and took risks to enable you to be where you are right now. Certainly by now, you've probably experienced yourself in spaces where, as Rhoda said, with her experience, with my own experience, I'm sure with Nancy's experience, we walk in and we don't feel welcome. No one has to actually say, get out, who told you to come? You feel it. You see it in their eyes. You see it in the way they look at you differently. You have to develop a fortitude within your spirit to know that any space you step is space that has been claimed for you. Doesn't matter what they think. Doesn't matter what they say. You have to own that self. You have to prepare yourself for those moments and know and trust that despite what folks might say about you or to you, you belong. And it is when you own that self, as you saw in that episode where we talked about those students that went on strike just to develop the first African American Studies program at San Francisco State. They didn't wait on somebody to tell them it's okay. They're living in that same critical moment. And so as you look around the space that you're in on the campus there, whether again, it's a 2-year or 4-year, and you're not seeing your community's experiences honored, you look on the walls of the buildings and you don't see people who look like you, you have the right to question those institutions as to why that's the case. Because it has allowed for other students to walk around with a false sense of superiority, the false sense of we belong and you don't. Those things have to change. We're seeing that. We're seeing institutions being challenged by students who are saying, we don't like the fact that you named this hall after a slave owner. We don't like the fact that this building is named for a Confederate soldier. And so those changes are occurring, yet we have to ensure that they are entrenched throughout the institutions in our society, all the way down to elementary schools. So that's the word to students. The word to administrators is, you got to make sure that our students are prepared for this new world. You got to make sure that you are speaking to the students in a way that where you are honoring them, where you are honoring their questions with real answers, with honest answers, and at the same time, not dampening their dreams, but building them up. Because what we know is what we know. And that the most advancements that we've ever made in our communities has been the result of people who dreamed dreams that were far bigger than what the society allowed for. And as a consequence of those dreams, we now are able to take deeper breaths, if you will, in our world today. And so, yes, definitely. And if there's one specific thing I would say is that administrators at the 2-year colleges need to be in conversation with administrators at the 4-year colleges that you are affiliated with in this transfer process to assure that that as you're essentially giving over your students to those institutions, that they understand and are equipped to and are prepared to receive those students well. We should not be essentially just dropping students off as though we're drop lifting them out of helicopters and just hoping that they'll land. They should have assurance that they're going to be treated as well as where they've come from. And that's the work of administrators. We should not leave that to students to have to navigate their way through. And again, I know that's what the work of the Kaplan Education Foundation is centered upon. And we just want to see that word go as far as it can.
Absolutely. And I think that, you saying that is key, because I think that you cannot do educational racial justice without understanding that I know, Rhoda, you and I, we see our children, our young men, young women, everyone, they are precious. We want them to claim the space, and we want to make sure that we are going to develop the conditions for those students to thrive, but we understand that it requires the operation of those administrators. So it is empty words if you say, yeah, we're committed, but to your point, you're not really looking at the needs that come as a result of the history of the United States and what it has imposed on so many of us. So
Right.
I think it's hand in hand. And what you have allowed us to see is that connection between the two. Yes, we do talk about transfer admissions and all of that, but it's not until you put it in this perspective that you understand that what we're trying to resolve is much more than granting a scholarship. It's
Yes.
really upholding our students. It's showing their identity. It's really celebrating them. It's really saying you come from greatness and we want you to pursue it. And so you have certainly kind of brought us that lens, and I cannot thank you enough, Laura. I just cannot. And I really mean that. I also want to make sure, Rhoda, I want to give you both the opportunity to always share, how people can get in contact with you and all of that. But before I do that, I have to thank Dan Strafford, who is behind the scenes. And Dan, he doesn't like to receive credits and loves to be behind the scenes. And I respect that. But I have to tell you, he has really brought himself and his whole family into it. He makes time for us when I'm sure he doesn't have the time. He's like doing 20 different projects at any given time. And for that, we are grateful. That is exactly what we say, right? That is being an ally, but that is really being a committed ally who is ready to work. And so I cannot thank you enough for all of your efforts and for always inviting us to do more, to work, that you are there for us. Cannot thank you. It's beyond your professional commitment. And I'm thank you. I
Thank you.
Who you are. So I will let Iwara please share your contact information, and then I will let Rhoda close it out.
Thank you, Nancy. It's been a pleasure, Rhoda, as well. And for those that, interested in learning more about Origin, the Oceania Racial Justice Initiative, please contact us at our website at racial-justice.org. And it has been my pleasure working with all of you, and hoping that you've really taken something from this series. Thanks, Rhoda.
Thank you, Iwari. And I'm here to close it out. Rhoda Tomaclo, Director of Operations for the Kaplan Educational Foundation. Our website is www.kaplan, that's with a K, edfoundation.org. Please have a happy holiday season and think of how education has allowed you to stay safe, and how can we make sure that that's something we can give to everyone who seeks it. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.